Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm James, and as Tom said, I am the summer intern here at the MidCoast Watershed Council, and I'm going to share with you a bit of what I've been up to this summer. So first, a little bit about me. I'm an incoming senior at Corvallis High School and a member of the school's track and field team. So this is me mid-race at the district's meet last year. And then over on the right here, this is a photo I took on the plane above Sydney, Australia. Whoops, okay. And if you look closely, you might be able to see the Opera House down there by the water, which is really cool to see from above. And although I really love traveling, it's pretty difficult for me to do so because I am the oldest in a family of 5 kids, and we also have our 2 dogs, Tempest and Buster, to think about, which makes traveling anywhere pretty difficult. But anyway, I found this internship on a whole list of local opportunities on OSU's website and decided to apply in hopes that it would help me to figure out, or at least narrow down, my post-high school plans by giving me an experience of a career in conservation and what that would entail. And since being accepted into this position, I've been able to help the council with a few of their many ongoing projects. So I'll get started with some of the field tours I was taken on this summer. So the very first day of the internship, I was taken on a tour of Beaver Creek and the Yaquina Bay area and was introduced to the goals of the council and some of the aspects that go into their work. And I got a lot of information on this first day, which was pretty overwhelming at the time. But looking back, it provided me with like really good broad picture of the purpose of the council and the work that they were getting done. And this right photo here is of the Beaver Creek planting site that we drove past briefly. And these are some of the trees that the council planted about 20 years ago. So that was a pretty cool thing to see on the first day. The second day, we woke up early and made our way out to the Otter Rock Marine Reserve to catch the low tide. And after exploring the tide pools for a while and learning about the intertidal zones, we were actually able to walk inside the Devil's Punch Bowl, shown in this photo on the right. And that was a really cool experience because I had no idea that people were allowed down there or that it was even possible to get into. So I really enjoyed that. In the couple weeks following, I was taken on some more field tours to previous restoration sites around the Alsea and Siletz area by Trevor and Evan. And these sites included North Creek and Big Creek, as well as Mill Creek and Bummer Creek and others. And that was a good way to see what the council was working towards creating regarding the complexity and vegetation surrounding streams. Now I'll transition to talking about some of the stuff I did at the Beaver Creek Nursery. So I helped out with a couple of the volunteer days that take place at the nursery, and I helped with moving and weeding the plant beds there. And I really enjoyed the weeding process actually, because it made a huge difference to the appearance of the beds and the garden as a whole, and was really satisfying work. Here's an aerial photo of the nursery, and as you can see, it includes 30 to 40 plant species at any given time, which is a lot. And so to keep track of all the different types of plants growing, I was tasked with the creation of these plant ID cards. I made 14 of these in total, and this was probably the most time-consuming project I worked on because coming up with the scientific name, size, habitat, and importance of all these plants, in addition to going through a whole multi-draft process, it took a bit of time. But last week I finished them up, and on Friday we were able to post them in the nursery for the volunteer day. And to give a little more information about the purpose of this project, I'll let Tom jump in and share a bit more.
Yeah, thanks, James. I just wanted to point out this is definitely like a gift that'll keep on giving for a long time, for sure, because they pretty quickly transform the nursery into just a working space, into like an interactive educational experience where you're seeing the plant, feeling the plant, and then you can read all this information about it. And yeah, just wanted to commend James there for, he's definitely got an eye for design and did a really good job breaking down the information. And if you're ever at Brian Booth State Park and want to check them out, we'll set them out whenever we're working there. And yeah, thanks. Back to James.
Next up, we've got large wood placements, which is a major focus of the council because the installation of these large wood placements is an important way to help maintain or restore the proper conditions of creeks in the areas. And by installing these large wood logs in strategic ways, we are able to create deep pools as the rivers and streams push sediments from underneath the logs further downstream. And this provides young juvenile salmon with deep, slow water that they need to spawn. And there was a recent large wood placement that took place at Mill Creek near the town of Alsea. And I was given the opportunity to tour this site while some of this work was being done. It was pretty cool seeing the big excavators pushing these like giant logs up the path to be later deposited in their strategic positions across the water. This was probably one of my favorite excursions we went on during the internship. It was an AQI, or an aquatic habitat inventory, of a different Mule Creek. This one is located in the Siletz area. And the reason this outing was so exciting was after making our way through some really dense foliage and even some patches of stinging nettle, we came to a pool that was filled with these rough-skinned newts, just resting and lying on top of each other. And I'd never seen anything like that, so that was a really cool thing to find. Now, I worked on a couple of data projects during my summer here, and the first one involved cross-section data from a previous project done at North Creek. So I'll let Tom jump in again and give a little background on that project.
Sweet, thanks, James. So yeah, here you can see the before and after. It used to be a pretty small, clearly undersized culvert, and in 2019 and 2020, it was replaced with a massive 45-foot base open bottom culvert that allows full aquatic organism passage up and down, sediments to be moved down, large pieces of wood to be passed down. So all these benefits of having a properly sized culvert. If you look really closely, you can see the little red dot there towards the base. That's Evan down there. So just to give you a little scale of how big that culvert really is. In fact, we go to the next slide. Thank you. And another consideration of culverts and having a properly sized culvert is that it's going to affect the actual stream bank size and shape, because downstream, as that water's coming out at a super high velocity, it's going to create erosion down to bedrock, essentially. And upstream of the culvert, it's going to create swirling eddies as that water's getting sucked through that hole and kind of widen out and pool up there. And so over time, the culvert is going to affect the actual morphology of the bottom of the stream. And so part of the monitoring that we're doing with that culvert is taking cross-sectional data with students from the Oregon Coast Community College as part of their freshwater ecology class, they'll come and take a bunch of different data. We look at benthic macroinvertebrates or bugs in the water, and count salmon, and take these measurements. And there you can see the student there taking the actual measurement of how high it is from a set height, which leads into James's project.
Okay. So I took that cross-section data from the different spots along the creek and created these visuals of what the creek's depth is across the width of it. And this provides a visual of what the bed of the creek looks like at all of these different spots. And I created 8 of these in total, which took a fair bit of time because I had no prior experience with this graphing or input of data before, but it provided a bit of a fun challenge, fun at times, figuring out how the software worked and all the shortcuts I could use in inputting the data. Then the other graphing or data project I worked on involved taking data from these temperature loggers located in rivers and streams marked on this map around the Alsea area. And so we took these temperatures over a long period of time and compared them to identify suitable salmon habitat. This is one of the completed graphs I made comparing the data from 2021 of the Alsea River and the upper and lower portions of Mill Creek. This is the same Mill Creek that received a large wood placement earlier this summer. And I also added these lines showing the optimal conditions for the young coho salmon. So you can see that the Mill Creek, both the upper and lower portions, it's a very valuable habitat for these young salmon because its waters remain at a pretty constant temperature that provides for the optimal growth of the young fish. Whereas the Alsea River remains too hot for a majority of the time, only reaching the optimal temperatures at the very end of the recorded time, showing that we really need to protect and help the fish make their way into the Mill Creek to give them a better chance at reproducing and surviving. And to give a little more information, I'll give it back over to Tom.
Thank you. Yeah, just quickly wanted to add, again, James did an awesome job, and in just this quick internship was definitely able to make some really valuable graphs. This is just one of the ones that he was able to make, and it obviously has really great information and clear management implications, and yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Yeah, definitely makes a difference with that. These ones.
Thank you. Then this was the second part of that temperature logger project, where we went out into the field to the locations of we went to half of the logger locations in one day and checked that they were all present and working correctly. And while doing this, we actually discovered that one of the loggers had disappeared, which was unfortunate and shows that if you're going to leave expensive equipment out in the field, you've got to be prepared not to get it back. But anyway, these photos were all taken at the Alsea River, which was our last stop of the day. So we took a bit of time to collect some blackberries and check out the wildlife there. And this is the last major contribution I made to the council this summer. I helped with the creation of a couple of social media posts on Instagram and Facebook. And although I don't really use socials myself, they're a really important way to spread the word about the MidCoast Watershed Council and bring attention to the important work that they're getting done. And so that concludes everything I did for the council this summer. And I'd just like to say that this internship has been awesome and has provided me with some really cool and authentic practice both in the field and in the office, of what a career in conservation might look like if I decide to pursue it. And although I'm not sure yet if this is what I want to pursue after college, it's definitely given me a lot to think about, and I really enjoyed everything I got to help work on. And um, yeah, I really am glad I was given this opportunity. As a final note, I'd like to thank both the Oregon Coast and Benton County STEM hubs, as well as the Bureau of Land Management, and of course, the MidCoast Watershed Council for giving me the opportunity to participate in this, again, awesome internship. So thank you.
Sweet. Great job, James. Got a bunch of props in the chat. I'll let you scroll through those. But, and reminder, throw some questions in there. We're going to do a little Q&A after Trevor's portion of the presentation, but I'll, for now, pass it over to Trevor.
Thanks, Tom. Man, that's going to be hard to follow. Great job, James. And I'll just echo the sentiments that it was a pleasure working with him these past 10 weeks, and wish you the best of luck in the future. I was a bit of a surprise twist at the end. I didn't know you were going to out me about the lost temperature logger to everybody, but you know, that's okay. That's true story there. Okay, let's see. I'm going to share my screen here. Where did it go? Okay, everybody know where they are? You see that picture coming in? Okay, good. So yeah, and I just wanted to say one other thing about James's experience. Kind of blows me away that you're doing this in high school. I mean, at your age, I had no idea about any of the things that you just described and discussed. So I think it's a pretty cool experience and quite unique, I would guess. I know times have changed a bit, but that was the type of experience that you got was, I wouldn't have gotten anything like that until well into my college years. So good for you, and thanks for being part of the team. So what I wanted to talk about, and let's see if I can get the screen to move here, is just give you a little more insight into some of our planting projects. Thought I'd just kind of talk about the cycle of a planting project, and just use this as a way of, I know in the past, and I kind of saved my announcement at the beginning that I usually make, which is, hey, come out and join us and volunteer. We have these volunteer days. And in case any of you had been wondering what that looks like a little bit more, here's your chance to get some behind the scenes peeks at what we get up to out in the field. And what, if you come join us, you will be helping with. So mostly it's an opportunity to just share some nice pictures, and I'll try not to belabor points too long because I could talk about this stuff all night, but hopefully you enjoy. So what we're going to talk about is just getting, thinking about how to start planning a project. And then once you get through that phase, getting the plants for that project, plant procurement, right? Then getting the site ready to be planted, planting the site, and follow up on that, monitoring and stewarding those plants until they're free to grow, which, to connect back to James's presentation, he kind of started on his first day with a picture of one of the tours that he went on of those rather mature trees, which is pretty close to where I'll end also. So let's see, let's get going. So just, this is going to be by no means exhaustive, just a little taste of some of these different phases. But when you're thinking about planning a planting project, some of the things to consider are the future conditions that you're trying to create at that site, which is quite a big ball of yarn in and of itself, because you start to grapple with things like, well, are we aiming to bring this degraded landscape back to a state maybe prior to human colonization altogether, or when it was inhabited by indigenous folks, or are we just trying to get some native plants in there and manage some weeds? So there's quite a number of considerations to think about there. And one of the ways to get help with that is to look at reference sites, which are areas near to the project site that are kind of looked at, considered to be the best of what's left, is one way to describe a reference site. So you go find something that's still intact, got a lot of native species and few weeds that is in similar site conditions to yours, and do some looking around what species you find there, how dense things are growing, and try to kind of emulate that. So reference sites can be super helpful for planning your planting project. Of course, you got to think about some less sexy details like scheduling, budgeting, permitting, agreements. There's a lot of paperwork, getting grants and funding sources, that sort of thing. So, but just to harp on the reference site thing a little bit, here's just some different examples of good looking environments, but how dramatically different they can be depending on what area you're working in. So you got a nice riparian area on the left along a stream, a coastal bluff system, or maybe you're working on the slopes of Wizard Island in the middle of Crater Lake, and it's a crazy pumice slope at 45-degree angle that will very much be a different planting project than the other ones. And I should say, in the previous slide, that was a picture of the Beaver Creek Marsh at Ona Beach, which is at Brian Booth State Park, which is another kind of reference site, or really nice intact marsh. So you'll see that again, and I'll mention. So here's just a kind of crazy looking diagram to illustrate that when you're planning these projects, you need to think about different zones. For instance, to the right, can you see my cursor? Let's see. So there's a stream over here, and it's going to be wetter and more flood prone, so it'll be disturbed. And as you transition away from the stream and floodplains, the soils will change, the disturbance regimes will change, and you might, get it all the way up to the upland where it can be hot and dry, and you might be thinking about drought tolerant plants as opposed to plants that are adapted for flooding, for instance, and wet conditions. So just a kind of planning phase. Let's see, you saw this photo before. So jumping into plant procurement, there's a few different ways to go about it. You can collect the seed and then propagate it, or buy that seed and propagate it, or broadcast seed it out, or you can collect material and propagate it that way through your nursery, or buy the plants directly. So we do some of all of those. So I'll just kind of touch on those different steps. Here we are back at Brian Booth State Park in the Beaver Creek Marsh, collecting some different species for direct seeding into our restoration sites, which we have some nearby. So this serves as a great reference site. We with the help of volunteers, collected seeds from over 20 different species. You might recognize that guy on the left there. And I thought I'd just share some pictures of different plants that we either have or might collect seed from. So at the top, you've got some wax myrtle. We collected a huge quantity of that last year. Native asters and thistle there. Top left, I just threw that in kind of for fun because I learned recently that we have a native lactuca or lettuce species here that can grow up to 15 feet tall, which I encountered. Usually that we have some other weedy lettuces, but there's a native one, so that could be cool to propagate around, especially since it's adapted to disturbed sites, which is the type of site that we're trying to restore often. So a little fun fact there. And had to throw that photo in because I love it. It's Beaver Creek again, and that plant in the middle there is a native dock Rumex occidentalis, which I think we maybe even collected seed from that individual plant, and we have some of that growing at the nursery right now, doing really well. Kind of interesting. I can't really see some of the words on my slide, but we also ordered a bunch of seed, 550 pounds worth from local growers. And don't worry too much about the chart down in the corner there. That's just to kind of show you how many different species we ordered seed from. And so on the right, you can see some of that seed kind of in action. There's grasses in the foreground, which are native. Those pink flowers are all native. They're occupying space that weeds are not occupying. They're helping keep the ground moist. They're providing pollinator habitat. They're going to be putting seed back onto the ground and keeping that cycle going, providing those benefits. And you can also see a alder tree growing inside of one of our elk exclosure fencing, which is kind of, I'll talk about just a little bit later. So at the nursery, whether we're using that seed or cuttings that we collect, we have to sow the seed and stake them and water and weed and do all these things at the nursery, keep the site clean and free of weeds that might get into the plants and then get out into the field. So there's always lots to do at the nursery, but you get rewarded with beautiful spring mornings like these lupin germinating in our pots at the nursery. Another quick picture of the overview of it and some of the people that helped build it and continue to help us grow and maintain the nursery there. So big thanks to the volunteers. And here's just kind of one pretty example of what's going on there. This is a seed production bed of a bristle stem checker mallow, a native and endemic and somewhat rare checker mallow to this region that we grow seed for to then propagate out further. So lots of fun stuff going on at the nursery. And yeah, you can just buy the plants directly, but it's not always easy to get the plants that you want. You need to think about whether or not these nurseries have the right species. Do they have local enough genetics if you're trying to get native plants to your region, and what are the cost factors? And so one of the partners that I'll just do a quick shout out to is NORP, I think it's Northwest Oregon Restoration Partnership, and they grow a ton of great plants, which we utilize heavily for our restoration projects. And here is an example of a load of plants coming from the NORP nursery to ours. We purchased over 10,000 plants last year, and we'd haul them down from their nursery to our nursery to store there temporarily while we got ready to plant them out in the field. And we use 30-foot long U-Haul trucks filled to the brim, 3,000 plants. So we had to do a bunch of loads of this. It takes hours to load them and unload them, and it's quite a process, but can be pretty fun too. And here's a picture of my plant tracking spreadsheet for last year with different sites, different species, different numbers. Can make your head spin sometimes. So then once you got the plants, you have your site and hopefully your plan going. So it's time to get the site ready for planting. You need to consider a few things like what weeds you have on site and how you're going to treat them. And so this picture shows a bunch of reed canary grass in the foreground and blackberry in the background growing. I don't know, is it swallowing that house back there? It might be. They'll do that if you let them. So this needs to be addressed, and you need to think about whether you're going to do that by machine or other methods, and what's the shade situation there. This is all part of the planning process too. But then you get into what we do often is use heavy machinery to be kind of the first pass on things like heavy duty blackberry infestations. Like in these pictures, this was a site with like 15-foot tall, 20-year-old blackberry vines, old growth blackberry as we call it. and a machine in action, and kind of after the machine's gone through, and now the site's looking ready to receive some of that seed that I was talking about. So we'll come through, especially at a time like that when the ground is bare and no weeds around, to try to get our native seed down to be the first thing to germinate and kind of lock up the available space. So after that, we're moving into planting. Once the rain is right, the soil moisture is right, we only plant in fall, winter, spring, once there's good soil moisture, because the plants we don't really irrigate plants generally, so we plant in that time of year so that the plants will get well watered in over the course of the winter and be ready come spring to sprout up and grow. So here's just a quick picture of that same site with the blackberry. We're staging plants there to get planted soon. In fact, on the right is that same site again after we've built some cages. Tom, once again, manning the earth auger that drills holes 4 inches wide and maybe 2 feet deep to get those large stock plants in the ground. But you can't always use that thing everywhere. So on the left, you can see a bag full of bare root conifer trees and a hodad sticking out of the ground next to a little tree there. This is, I think, at our Y27 site, which we had to access with a boat. So not great to be hauling around heavy duty equipment if you can help it. This site again, probably shouldn't use this twice, but just to reemphasize, now you got to think about your plant needs and getting them into the right place. And so, when it's planting time, you're thinking about the different nuances of the plant needs and whether they can tolerate so much moisture or drought or shade or not. So always many things to think about when it comes to planting. Plus, it's a lot of work. We plant a lot of trees, so we like to get lots of help if we can. I think this is my little guy, Leo, on the bottom left. He's been out to a restoration site or two already in his tenure. And Kai in the middle with Tom there on the right has been helping us plant the site for multiple episodes there. That's kind of in his backyard, and so he's been enthusiastic volunteer, to say the least, when we hang out with him. And this is one of the main things that we like to do in the winter with volunteers. It can be difficult work, but it can also be a lot of fun if you like to play in the mud. As you can see, you get dirty, but everybody's enjoying themselves, and many hands make light work. So thanks again to the folks that help us out there. I thought I'd throw this in just as a kind of connect some dots. We use stakes often at sites because for numerous reasons. They grow vigorously, they require a minimal amount of work, they're really good at stabilizing banks and creating habitats, but they also willows in particular are our favorite food source for beaver, and beaver are one of the wildlife, animals that we're trying to promote the recovery of. And once they're on site, they do a whole host of other things that are beneficial to the site. So, and this up in the top image is an example of copacing, which is a strategy that we're starting to utilize at the nursery, but kind of do it naturally at other locations where you cut down a plant that's prone to stump sprouting, and they'll put up all these shoots that you can then harvest and directly stake out into the field or in a nursery pot if you want. Just a little personal note to say this has been one of the most rewarding parts of my career, going out to these different sites and planting hundreds and thousands of trees across different habitat types and degraded areas, and with the knowledge that at least some, hopefully a good number, will continue to grow for hundreds of years to come. And it's good physical exercise too, I'll tell you that. So then you've got your site planted and you need to make sure those things grow. So you've got to be out there monitoring and stewarding those plants and maintaining those sites. James came with me as he mentioned on a little site tour. I was checking back in on some of our planting sites to make sure things were looking good and kind of assessing what maintenance needs needed to happen at these different sites. So you can see in the foreground a nice cedar growing there and a Doug fir over there. Here's an example of one of our kind of browse protection cages. We use different strategy. Also in the foreground, a weed mat to stop the competition from weeds right around it. And, you know, you can create your plan and implement it as best you can, but nature's kind of the final arbiter. So you're going to have to go out repeatedly and see what's actually happening and then adapt your plan and keep things changing to meet the needs of the nuances of the site. So kind of the adaptive management idea there that we employ regularly. And so to control the different weeds at the site, there's biocontrols out there. This is like tansy ragwort and the cinnabar moth, which was introduced to help control that. Probably many of you know that story. Pretty cool caterpillars and moths also, and they do definitely help. But we often do more of a manual control approach. Crew was out there today with brush cutters at a site, and they sometimes do that for nearly weeks on end. A lot of this kind of work going on this time of year. So assuming that you've successfully planted and maintained your site and the trees get to a free to grow state and they kind of graduate, we take the cages off, we stop doing maintenance, and you know, once the plants are above the browse line, they're looking healthy and they're likely going to survive, you know, wind and rain and drought and floods. They're ready to go. So we just stand back and watch them. Maybe come back and monitor or add some plants, occasionally thin. But you know, in this picture, you can see a site that was planted quite a number of years ago that was pretty much all reed canary grass, and now has those trees are 20-30 feet tall and growing happily, and going to create some nice habitat eventually. Possibly, you know, to some extent like this is a different kind of area, but you know, the idea is that these plants will persist and change the weedy, degraded condition that they were in. That's why we're there, trying to restore them into something that will have a much more functional ecological value and hopefully persist in that state for a long, long time to come. Then you just keep doing that again and again, and hopefully move the needle. So that's my little spiel about planting projects. Happy to answer any questions and hope to inspire some of you to come out and play in the mud with us. Thanks. Let's see. Thanks, guys.
Good work, Trevor. Sifting through all the compliments for James here. Hold on, looking for questions. So Margot asks, from whom do you buy your seeds?
Yeah, one of the main suppliers that we went to is called Pacific Northwest Natives. Where are they? They're over in Albany, I believe.
Yep.
And there's some other ones, but not too many people grow coastal genetic material. So I guess this is a good opportunity to mention that there is a pretty recently formed partnership called the Coastal Native Seed Partnership, CNSP, sounds right. And so there's efforts underway to really create available seed that's really appropriate for this location, and just more and different species. So that is something we're tuned into and working with them to augment the supply of coastal genetic seed material. Yeah.
So question for James from Lisa. What was the most interesting thing you learned or saw during your internship?
The most interesting thing I saw was definitely that pool of newts I mentioned in my slide. And then the most interesting thing I learned, I think it was the big impact that the large wood placements could have, because I didn't know anything about that before starting this internship. And now I know all about it. Yeah.
It worked. And Sarah just says comment lasting legacy and kind of reference to your presentation there, Trevor, with the trees. Not many jobs offer that, and I agree with that. That's why I know Tom, Trevor, and I all ended up here, and maybe James will end up back here at some point with us as well. So I think that was it for the questions. Yeah, I think that's all we got for tonight. So
Good.
yeah, and I'll kind of heap on to James here and say it was awesome to have you, and we're really looking forward to you're moving on to your senior year, and we've talked about you with going to college and all that, but I think anytime you're ready to come back and work, we'll find a spot for you if you're interested. So it was great to see. I know Trevor and I get kind of lost in the field a lot during the summer, and it was really great to have. Sometimes literally, yes. And Tom, a lot of credit to Tom too. He really spearheaded this effort to bring James on, bring an intern on for the season, and took on a lot of work with that and showing James around, and we all had a great time with you. So thank you, James. Thank you, Tom, and thanks, Trevor, for the presentation this evening as well. So I think we'll wrap it up there. We'll take a short break here and get back together for our quick board meeting here tonight. Thanks again, James. I think you've got one day left tomorrow, and I think you're gonna get on a kayak and get out on Beaver Creek. So that sounds like a good last day to me. So thanks again, and thanks to everyone for coming tonight.
Thanks, y'all.
Have a good evening.